Welcome, you're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. The headlines. Iran warns international airlines to change course and stay out of its airspace as Israel braces for a direct attack. Egypt and Jordan try to pressure Tehran to moderate its response, but are reportedly rebuffed. And despite the tensions, oil stocks head lower as part of a global sell-off prompted by US economic concerns. Iran has warned international airlines to stay out of its airspace amid fears the Islamic Republic will attack Israel as early as tonight. The United Nations says the situation is extremely precarious. Iran says it does not seek a regional escalation but must punish Israel. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran has the latest.
As Israel braces for an expected Iranian attack in response to the assassination of Hamas leader in Tehran, its neighbors and allies, including the United States, are preparing to defend it, as they did last time around.
We've also been very, very consistent about proving, not just with words, but with action, that we're going to stand up and defend Israel. I mean, on April 13th, when Iran launched 300 missiles and drones, the United States had aircraft, fighter planes in the air to knock them down. We've now added additional naval and air assets to the region to help defend Israel again. I think we've proven time and time again that we're going to support Israel.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reportedly told his counterparts from G7 countries on Sunday that a combined attack by Iran and Hezbollah could begin in the next 24 to 48 hours. Israeli sources warn such predictions cannot be made with certainty, as the IDF says the current security guidelines have not changed.
Iran and its proxies seek to surround us with a stranglehold of terror on 7 fronts. Their visible aggression is insatiable, but Israel is not helpless. We are determined to stand against them on every front, in every arena, far and near. Anyone who murders our citizens, anyone who harms our country will be held accountable. They will pay a very heavy price.
Meanwhile, Iran continues to threaten Israel with a harsh response, vowing the assassination of Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh, blamed on Israel, will not go unanswered. The commander of the IRGC, Hossein Salami, vowed the response against Israel will come at the appropriate time and place.
The Zionists think that by assassinating Haniyeh, they have reached some success that helps them survive. They are digging their own grave, and they will gradually get themselves buried in these swamps and holes.
The Islamic Republic of Iran, using its intrinsic right, based on international rules and regulations, will definitely take serious deterrent actions to guarantee its security and punish the aggressor with power, decisiveness and toughness. But we do not seek regional escalation.
With Washington believing the Iranian attack is imminent, U.S. President Joe Biden will convene his national security team in the Situation Room on Monday to discuss developments in the Middle East. Biden will also speak with Jordan's King Abdullah, his only official scheduled call for Monday. The call comes a day after Jordan's foreign minister Ayman Safadi made a rare visit to Iran in attempts to prevent further escalation. In the visit, Safadi reportedly told his Iranian counterpart that Jordan will not allow its airspace to become an arena for war. Ya Allah!
And Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has been visiting the Israeli Air Force Underground Command Center at the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv today, warning them to be ready to go on the counter-offensive quickly. We're here to talk about Israel's preparedness. Yossi Melman is an intelligence and defense commentator and the co-author of Spies Against Armageddon. Welcome, Yossi.
Thank you.
Good to see you amid this very tense time we're all experiencing. So I'll ask you, is Israel prepared?
Yes, Israel is prepared. Israel is coordinating its actions with the United States. General Kurila, the commander of CENTCOM, was here. Also, the chief of staff of British Armed Forces and the British Foreign Secretary. And I think the United States is gathering a sizable force to repel the Iranian attack, but they don't have any offensive intentions. In other words, Israel and the coalition would have to defend themselves and repel the rocket and missile attacks which are expected to fall on Israel very soon.
Right, and talk us through the various scenarios the IDF is preparing for. A direct attack from Iran, as we saw back in April when they launched 300 missiles that were shot down by a coalition of various countries in the region. And, of course, via its proxy groups, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen.
Well, it all depends. The Israeli preparations depend on the scenario that would develop by Iran and its proxies. Will it be just an Iranian attack? Will it be a multi-frontal attack from Lebanon simultaneously by Hezbollah, from Syria by the Iranian pro-Shiite militias, from Yemen? And then the Israeli reaction would be a direct response to whether military bases, military installations would be hit only, or if the Iranians and their allies, proxies, will target and hit civilian sites. Now, if you look at Tel Aviv, the distance between Hakiria, the IDF, and the Ministry of Defense headquarters,
where we just saw Yoav Gallant visiting the...
Yes, and the Israeli center, which is the 3 tallest buildings in Tel Aviv. It's just 100 meters. So if a missile misses the headquarters, IDF headquarters, it will hit a civilian site. I mean, I think the Israeli IDF, especially the Air Force, are ready. The anti-aerial defense systems, Arrow and others are also in place. The intelligence is trying to decipher Iranian intentions, and above all, the most important urgent question is to know exactly when the Iranian will launch their attack. And even if it is not known, still Israel would have Israelis would have between 10 to 15 minutes to go to the shelters, because the distance from Iran to Israel is 1,200, 1,500 kilometers. So it provides enough time to be safe, at least in your shelter.
Okay. All right, Yossi, for now, thank you very much. Well, Iran has issued a warning to international airlines not to fly over parts of the country, advising them to change their routes. Well, to talk more about the messages coming out of Tehran, we're joined by Dr. Menachem Merhavi, Middle East expert at the Truman Institute and the Shalem Academic Center. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. So Iran says it does not want a regional escalation, but that it is compelled to punish Israel for a series of assassinations. It blames on Israel a senior Hezbollah figure in Beirut, of course, and the Hamas leader Haniyeh, who was killed in Tehran. How do you predict that Iran will walk this very difficult tightrope?
Right. It is a difficult tightrope, as you said, and thanks for having me. I think I sense a certain confusion in the Iranian, ruling elite at the moment. There are, broadly speaking, 2 camps: the reformist camp, so to speak, or it's often considered to be reformist. It's not so much, but of the just now President Pezeshkian and his foreign affairs advisor Zarif, and there's the more extreme or hardcore conservative camp, which is closer to the supreme leader. So far, you can say still the latter group has the upper hand and the more tone in the way things are run in Tehran at the moment. And that means that Iran wants to exact a price from Israel. They would want to do something a little more dramatic than what we saw in April. And yet, if there's any kind of comfort I can give in this message, is that I think they do want to avoid a catastrophe here. And they will do their best to do that, because they know that if there's great numbers of civilians, a significant number of civilians, which I cannot, enumerate exactly how much we're talking about, that would open a whole new front that Iran is not in.
Well, for years, Dr. Merhavi, Iran has worked tirelessly, hasn't it, to make sure that it is not involved in a direct fight with Israel. It prefers to fight Israel via its proxies in Lebanon, in Yemen and elsewhere. To what extent are we now seeing the fight brought closer to Iran's backyard?
Well, again, you're right. I think they do. They did open a new venue, if you like, in April, but I think they know the limits of this venue because they either. I mean, they have two main risks by doing that, by launching rockets or drones from Iran, from the soil of Iran. One is that it will draw the fight to their territory, as we said, and this is something that. If you'd like, I'd elaborate. But anyway, it has a deep history in the Islamic Republic to avoid. As you said, they would rather have it on other people's soils and other countries. The other element, which you should also take into account, is that if they do something like another April, they risk the reputation of. Because after all, as much as they, with all the buildup they did in April, like they're doing now. They know that the effect of this attack was minimal in Israel. Once you do the same trick twice, its power, its influence is even weaker than the first time. So I think they also know there's a dwindling effect of their threats and of their attacks directly from Iran.
The United States has sent significant military support to Israel, as it has done in the past. But the message, the policy from the Biden administration is one of de-escalation. Do not escalate. That is the message for Israel. How is that message being read in Tehran?
Well, I think they kind of know that this message, in a way, makes things easier for Tehran itself, in the sense that they do not want to be the aggressor or to be perceived as the aggressor. As I know it sounds a little funny maybe, but they do not. They see themselves as just trying to save their honor in a way by this attack, just like they did in April, by the way, following an attack on practically Iranian soil on the consulate in Damascus. So I think they do not go with great enthusiasm to this attack. And the American message that you mentioned towards Israel, in a way, I would say is doubled in Tehran by the fact that, if they feel that Israel will not, has no big plans for an attack on Iranian soil, that makes it easier for them to go on a lower level kind of attack on Israel.
And one more thing, we've seen a senior Russian official, the Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu, arriving in Tehran this afternoon. What should we read into that?
Well, I think the Russians want to make sure that, their interests in Syria are not risked. And it is no secret by now that Iran has some new militias now armed on Syrian soil. And there's kind of talk in the intelligence community about the prospects of an attack from that area, and that could risk actually Russian interests. They want to make sure this is not going to happen. And I think they also want to send a message to the international community, and especially to the bloc of countries like China and Tehran and its proxies, that they stand by Tehran at this hard moment, so to speak.
Dr. Menachem Merhavi, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, there were scenes of chaos at Beirut International Airport this afternoon after several airlines cancelled flights. More and more countries have been calling on their citizens to leave Lebanon immediately amid fears of a major escalation between Israel and Hezbollah. Yulia Papagilova has this report.
As Israel prepares for an imminent attack by Iran and Hezbollah after high-profile assassinations in Tehran and Beirut, panic is also gripping the streets of Lebanon.
I'm very scared. I will pick myself up and go. I've already booked a ticket, and now they're saying the airport is going to boom. So I'm scared, honestly. I'm very scared. I'm scared I won't be able to leave this country and die here.
More and more countries are issuing warnings to its citizens to leave or not travel to Lebanon amid fears of a wide-scale war. A growing list of governments are calling on their citizens in the country to book any available flight out of Lebanon and, quote, leave now.
Do not travel to Lebanon at the moment. There is a risk that the Beirut airport might not be open for commercial flights. And given the numbers of people who are there, there's no guarantee that we can just guarantee that people will be able to come home through other means if that airport is shut.
This widespread call for evacuation adds to the suspension of flights by airlines like Emirates, Air France, and Lufthansa due to safety concerns. At Beirut Airport, people are waiting in long lines as the tension escalates the anxiety.
We live in Paris and we came to Lebanon hoping to spend 3 weeks with our family here. But because of the situation, we had to leave earlier.
Meanwhile, Lebanon has received emergency medical supplies from the WHO to equip its hospitals for possible war injuries.
Our responsibility is to ensure that we have, emergency supplies and trauma kits, all the referral hospitals in the country. And we are working very closely with the Minister of Health as well as other partners to facilitate and to ensure that these supplies are ready for any eventuality.
But Lebanese civilians are not the only ones in the country in a state of panic. Hezbollah is also evacuating senior personnel and military equipment from strongholds in Beirut, anticipating possible Israeli strikes. Iran has further inflamed the situation, suggesting that Hezbollah might escalate its attacks against Israeli civilians. And while Iran continues its psychological games, the whole region remains on the edge.
Well, let's get an update from that very tense border between Israel and Lebanon now. Our correspondent Robert Swift is there. And Rob, you are at the site of what has essentially been a battleground for the last 10 months between the IDF and the Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah. Any sign of what they're preparing for, and what is the level of readiness in Israel?
So throughout the day and even in the early hours of yesterday, of last night, there's been a string of attacks along the border in the west, the central zone of the Israel-Lebanese border, and here in the far east as well. Now, it's unclear if this is just a slight uptick in the regular violence which takes place here almost every day, or if this string of attacks are in some way a preparation from Hezbollah for what is expected to be a larger scale attack involving that group and Iran plus other groups. Now, it may be that essentially they're trying to test Israel's air defenses, stretch their readiness, or this may just be run-of-the-mill violence which has been taking place here for so long now. Now, the IDF have conducted a number of interceptions of drones throughout the day as a result of these attacks, and it's also conducted two attacks of its own. One just on the other side of the border behind me, on the other side of the hills, which you can see, where the IDF said that it conducted a strike against a drone operating team, which local sources said killed 2 people. And further north, inside Lebanon, a second IDF strike, this one again reported by Lebanese sources, where they said that 1 individual had been killed in that strike.
Rob, thank you very much. Robert Swift there, up in the north of Israel. Arab countries have been trying to use their influence to get Tehran to dial down the temperature. The Jordanian foreign minister visited Tehran yesterday for the first time in 9 years. The US ally has said it will shoot down any missiles that enter its airspace. Egypt has reportedly told Iran it will not be part of any defensive coalition to protect Israel. We're using back channels to try and convince the Iranians to moderate their response. Well, joining me now, Dalia Ziada is an Egyptian scholar and senior fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much for being with us, Dalia. Good to see you again. So do the Iranians listen to Egypt? Will they take into account Cairo's concerns?
Thank you, Laura. Always a pleasure to be with you. It's very concerning, the statements that came out from Egypt, or the reports that came out about Egypt not willing to cooperate in any defense measures against Iran, because it seems like the Egyptian government is still not aware that Israel's security has very much to do with Egypt's security, and they are very interdependent. It seems also that it's not only the case of Egypt, but other Arab countries also seem to be more aligning to the axis of evil in comparison to aligning to Israel and the Western axis. And I think one of the main reasons behind this is that they are trying to bet on what they think is the stronger horse. in light of the absence of the United States from playing a security role in the Middle East in the past few years. So they are thinking that perhaps by aligning by the axis of evil, they are gaining more protection for their own national security. But I believe sooner than later, they will be proven wrong.
So is this a new policy? Is this a shift in policy, Dalia, that you've seen?
It's not a shift in policy if we look at all the flawed policies that the Egyptian government has taken recently in terms of the war in Gaza. However, it's a shift in policy if compared to the perfect relationship that was between Egypt and Israel in the past, let's say, decade, since President el-Sisi came in power and the cooperation on military and security level started between Egypt and Israel. We remember very well how Israel sided with Egypt against Hamas and against the rising terrorism in Sinai. In particular, in the aftermath of the removal of the Muslim Brotherhood from power. Actually, the fact last week, over the weekend, I believe, there was a meeting between a security delegation from Israel and the Egyptian security authorities, and they discussed Israel control on the Philadelphia corridor. And surprisingly, Egypt once again was standing against this. Also, if we think about what type of cooperation would Israel need from Egypt, it's somehow different from what it would need from Jordan or Israel. Jordan and Israel are on the eastern side of the conflict. They are kind of the buffer zone between Israel and Iran and its proxies. So their role is more efficient in terms of protecting their skies against Iranian missiles. And it also has very much to do with their own national security, defending their own national security. On the other hand, Egypt is on the western side of the conflict, and it doesn't have a crucial role similar to that of Saudi Arabia and Jordan, but it has a very important role in controlling any potential rise of Hamas in Gaza or in the borders between Gaza and Sinai, while the Israeli army is busy with fighting with Iran. The fact that Egypt is refusing to cooperate on that is very disturbing and would definitely or maybe lead to the re-rise of Hamas in a certain way if, God forbid, we got onto this regional war.
And Dalia, just briefly, I mean, Egypt is a recipient of hundreds of millions of dollars in US aid and support. Has there been any pushback from Washington at all?
I think the Central Command at one point or another will ask for Egypt's help in the Red Sea. In case we got into regional war, of course, the Houthis will be activated to operate against Israel, and the Red Sea will turn into a piece of hell. At that time, Egypt should be, it actually must be obliged somehow to contribute to protecting the Middle East, opening the space for opening its skies and its land and its seaports to the Central Command to operate in these areas so it can defend Egypt's national security, Israel's national security, and also regional security against Iran-sponsored proxies in the Red Sea like the Houthis or even against Hezbollah.
Dalia, thank you very much. Dalia Ziadeh there.
Thank you.
Well, the United States is coordinating closely with Israel on its defence against an Iranian attack. The CENTCOM chief, General Kurilla, was here. The US has also sent an aircraft carrier, warships and a fighter squadron to the region. Colonel Rich Outzen is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and geopolitical consultant at Dragoman LLC. Good to have you with us. Rich, we heard leaks, didn't we, from that testy meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu a couple of days ago. Is the alliance still strong enough to fend off an Iranian attack?
Laura, it's good to be with you. I think the answer is yes. Context matters. I think this administration has been sharply critical of Netanyahu and his approach to the war in Gaza, demanding cessation of offensive operations and some sort of an end game or a strategy politically for ending the conflict. But when it comes to Iran and the threat from Iran, I think there's still strong bipartisan support. And if you just look at the traffic in Israel and in Washington today, you'll see evidence of that. The president's convening his cabinet to talk about what happens in the event of a major Iranian attack against Israel. The CENTCOM commander is in Israel, that General Kurilla, as you mentioned before, our Secretary of Defense was on the phone with his Israeli counterpart. And I think the material preparations in terms of providing, you mentioned the aircraft carrier, fighter squadron, all sorts of air defense and munitions. If there is a major flare-up, major attack via Hezbollah in Lebanon, or a replay of the spring's massive missile and drone attack, I think absolutely there'll be a strong solidarity response from the United States. That's still there, even though there's been sort of a tepid response at the political level, and a lot of people saying that this administration's been less supportive than they would have liked to have seen.
Well, the policy has been pressurising Israel to show restraint and not to escalate, to avoid escalation at all costs. And here we are in Israel, braced for a major attack, a direct attack from Iran. Is that policy partly to blame?
I think so. I think that this sort of trying to put your arms around both sides, which the United States is doing, saying, Israel, really be restrained, calm down, not just in Gaza, but in general, don't hit back very hard. At the same time, reaching out through allies and indirectly talking to the G7 and all of those countries that still have close relations with Tehran, telling them, okay, you can hit back, but only so hard. This is trying to choreograph an escalation that Iran has been driving the whole time. I mean, certainly the assassinations in Lebanon and in Iran last week can be seen as a provocation, perhaps from Tehran, but the whole cycle of escalation from both sides is a reflection of the proxy war that Iran has been leading for decades now. So the equidistance approach of the Biden administration of saying, well, let's talk to both sides and counsel restraint all around, I think that's a misdiagnosis, because it misses the point that this is exactly what the Iranians want, that they think that their political hand in the region is strengthened by the continuation of the conflict.
Colonel Richardson, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
Time for a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about how all of this is affecting hostage negotiations. That's next.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. Talks to free the 115 hostages still in captivity in Gaza will not resume until the late Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh is replaced. That's according to media reports here in Israel. The latest round of talks took place yesterday in Cairo. Well, our Emily Francis is with the families of some of the hostages down in Tel Aviv, and she joins us now. And Emily, of course, if these reports are true, this will be a major blow to the families of the hostages.
Hey, good evening, Laura and everyone. Listen, the families are so used to so many blows that they're really having a hard time having any sense of optimism. I'm in Hostage Square now, where there was about a 2-hour event celebrating, if it's possible to celebrate, the 5th birthday of Ariel Bibas. Of course, the Bibas family and the children are basically the most well-known around the world, given that they're these beautiful red-headed boys, with Kfir Bibas turning 1 back in February. A big, big groundswell of people taking part with an event that started in Habima Square, and they marched all the way here to Hostage Square, where they just wrapped up a very compelling ceremony with speeches, music, balloons, releasing like hundreds of orange balloons, and commenting on the fact that this is not okay, that here we are over 300 days, still no sign of life, no information whatsoever. It is just a horrible situation, especially given that any sense of any hostage deals have not come to fruition. But it's really the unity of the Israeli people and people from around the world that are sending their love that is really keeping them going, giving them the energy to keep going, even though they're living a daily nightmare for well over 300 days now.
Emily, thank you. Emily Francis there. Well, with me in the studio, Yossi Melman, intelligence and defence commentator and the co-author of Spies Against Armageddon. Thanks for staying with us, Yossi. And our senior correspondent, Bianca Zanini, has joined us as well. Thanks for joining us, Bianca. So, Yossi, there had been some reports of progress being made in the latest round of hostage negotiations. Yesterday, I know we've heard this many, many times before, but this is absolute agony for the families now, isn't it?
There is no progress for nearly 3 months. It's a standstill. The delegations, the Israeli security delegations, are going back and forth to Cairo, occasionally to Qatar, a meeting with CIA director in Europe. But this is just to preserve the framework of the negotiating process. But in terms of substance, there is no progress. Not only that, the Israeli security chiefs are blaming Netanyahu for whenever there is we reach on the brinkmanship of achieving a breakthrough. Netanyahu is setting new conditions, and it's almost impossible to negotiate this way. And they are frustrated, the Israeli security chiefs, but first of all, they have to follow the instructions of the government, of the political echelon, and secondly, they face a huge dilemma. Some of them maybe would have liked to resign because they are so frustrated. But on the other hand, they say if we resign, we will betray our mission to negotiate the release of the hostages, even if the chances are very slim. And it seems that they are very, very, very slim.
And one of those sticking points, Yossi, is allowing people in the south of Gaza to move to the north of Gaza. That seems to be one of the major sticking points for the Prime Minister.
No, there are no obstacles, because the security chiefs, whether it's the Shin Bet chief, whether it's the Mossad chief, or even the negotiator, coordinator of intelligence, Reserve General Alon Nitzan, all of them are saying that the security aspects of the deal can be maintained, that they are certain that if there is a deal, the security aspects of it would not be an obstacle. In other words, Israel can be safe and secured even with the deal, and still Israel controls Gaza and most of the areas. And there are some ideas how to control the move of the Palestinians, the Gazans, from the south to the north. The feeling among the families and the security establishment is that these are just excuses because of political consideration, and we know the political consideration. Netanyahu's government is threatened by the radicals in his cabinet that the moment there is a ceasefire, even a temporary ceasefire, in order to release some of the hostages, they would leave the government.
And Bianca, Prime Minister Netanyahu was forced to defend his position last night, wasn't he?
Well, last night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came out and said that Israel is ready for whatever response Iran is going to come with. And then he said that he is willing to and doing everything he can in order to move forward with an agreement. Now, just to add to what you're saying here, the latest we've heard, the latest reports are saying that Netanyahu reportedly told Israeli security chiefs that he wants now to wait for an answer from the U.S. for them to commit to that if there's no progress between phase 1 and phase 2, that Israel will be able to resume fighting with Hamas. The U.S. is saying that they've already agreed to giving this letter and that there is no issue here. And the criticism of this, this repeated criticism that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu keeps finding excuses to delay the deal seems as relevant now as it was a week ago, a month ago, 2 months ago. And today we've now heard that negotiations are on hold right now until after whatever response Iran is going to come with. And yesterday Hamas also said that they are, on their part, freezing the negotiations until they find a successor to Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed. So at this moment, there is nothing going on.
Nothing's going on. And Yossi, two questions really. First of all, isn't it the case that not all of the families of the hostages are on the same page? Because with this staged deal, some of them are saying, no, you need to do all or nothing. You need to get all of the hostages. You can't just take some of them because the others, we're not confident that we'll ever see them again. And the other point I want to make is, to ask you about is, if it was indeed Israel, was it wrong to kill Ismail Haniyeh at this time, given that it has apparently had a direct impact on the negotiations?
To answer your first point, 90% of the families are united, and they express the same views that Netanyahu is putting obstacles on the, in the negotiations. There is a small minority, however, and which is along political ideological lines, which is more expressing radical views, saying that.
But the families of some of the men, for example, men or male soldiers who are being held, their families are saying we can't trust Hamas to do a two-stage deal because they'll never release our families.
So there is no deal. I mean, you have to make a decision.
Okay.
And leaders are in power to make decisions. There is a division among the families, but the majority of them support a deal, even if it's in stages. Of course, it would have been much, much better than it would be in one take. All the hostages would be released.
So something is better than nothing.
Yes, and then regarding the second point which you made about, well, I am not a great supporter of assassinations, but assassinations, targeted killings can be a necessity if it is supplemented by a larger strategy. But it seems that in the last months, or even since the outbreak of the war on October the 7th, this is the only tool which Israel is using. Assassinations in Gaza and in Lebanon and now in Tehran.
If it was.
I want to add to this. When we heard the news of the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, there was an absolute sense of victory throughout Israel. There was a sense that restoration of the faith in the IDF and the intelligence community was able to reach this deep into Iran. There was a sense of pride here.
It was a feel-good moment.
It was a feel-good moment. But the truth is, and I said this before, that the big question we have to ask ourselves is, how does this assassination get us closer to the goal, which is to dismantle Hamas's governing capabilities in Gaza and to reach a hostage deal to get the hostages back home? And it seems like it did neither.
Okay, thank you both. Well, one of the issues in the negotiations has been Israel's control of the Philadelphia corridor between Gaza and Egypt. Israel says its continued control is essential to prevent Hamas from rearming. Cairo had reportedly softened its stance on that particular issue. More in this report from our Zach Anders.
A tunnel tall enough to fit a truck, wide enough for a military Humvee. That's what the IDF says has been running underneath the Philadelphia corridor, revealing these images over the weekend. The pictures then used to geolocate its approximate location here, less than 2 miles away from the Rafah crossing. The nearly 10-foot or 3-meter-high tunnel that runs straight from Gaza into Egypt was discovered in the past week by combat engineers in the IDF.
In Gaza, I want to update you on our operational effort. We are focusing on locating and neutralizing underground infrastructure in the Rafah area and the Philadelphia corridor. So far, dozens of tunnels have been located, which are being investigated, neutralized, and destroyed by our troops. Not all of these are active tunnels. Some are very old and have been previously dealt with by IDF troops. We are neutralizing them all. Last week, our troops located a large-scale terror tunnel in the Philadelphia corridor, approximately 3 meters high, large enough for a vehicle to pass through. At this stage, the troops are investigating the tunnel route and neutralizing it. The IDF is thoroughly destroying the underground infrastructure along the Philadelphia corridor and will act with determination to prevent their formation in the future. This is a continuous and complex effort, combining operational, engineering, and advanced technological capabilities.
The IDF says this is one of several dozen tunnels discovered near the Philadelphia corridor in the last few months, claiming that 25 of the discovered passageways run under and into Egyptian territory.
All right, and Bianca, let's talk about this report by CNN, which says that Israel's claims that it has nearly destroyed Hamas are inaccurate, and in fact the group is rearming, is reorganizing, and it's actually managing to put whole battalions back together in Gaza.
That's right. According to this analysis that was done by the CNN together with 2 think tanks, they looked at footage on the ground, interviewed experts, and they looked at statements from Hamas and from Israel. And basically what they're saying is that nearly half of Hamas's battalions have partially rebuilt their fighting capabilities. Now, out of 24 battalions that are, according to the IDF, exist in the Gaza Strip, 3 of them have been completely destroyed. 8 of them have been damaged, partially damaged, still operating, but 13 are weakened, but not completely destroyed. So what they're saying is that in the central part of Gaza, that's where they've been weakened the least. That's where they've been able to regroup in the center
which is
part
where
of Gaza.
Most of the hostages are believed to be held.
Exactly. So there's a connection with the strategy there. And the criticism has been from U.S. experts and experts also here in Israel that because there's been a lack of a long-term plan for Gaza, what was supposed to come after Hamas, and because there's been a very big focus on bombing campaigns at first, the targeted the strategies have not been as effective. And of course, yes, Hamas has been weakened. Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. The nature of the war has changed from a fighting war to a guerrilla war. But still, I mean, we're 10 months into this war, and half
Israel's longest war since the War of Independence, right, Yossi?
This will, concerning numbers.
This will come as a huge disappointment to Israel, if it's true.
Already after the mistaken killing of the 3 Israeli hostages which tried to escape, the IDF changed its fighting tactics on the ground and was very cautious not to move to areas where they believed, based on intelligence they gathered, in order not to put it on the hostages at arm's way. So that's why Hamas managed to regroup in some areas of Gaza. But still, Hamas as a military force has been defeated. I mean, last week they tried to renew their launching of their missiles. I think last week 25 missiles were fired from Gaza, which was relatively a big number in comparison to previous weeks. But Hamas has been defeated as a military force. Therefore, they're switching to a different tactics of guerrilla war, attrition war, hit and run. But as far as the military is concerned, mopping up the Gaza area is almost completed, finished, and there is a need now to bring in a policy in which the Israeli leaders would say, how can we replace Hamas as a governing body in Gaza? Because militarily, it doesn't exist anymore as a fighting force, as a semi-militia army kind of organization which they built over the years.
And for that, of course, Yossi, Israel is going to need its allies in the region. Just going back to what we were talking about earlier, the last time Iran attacked Israel, we saw a formidable coalition of Arab states along with the Europeans and the Americans. What has changed since then, do you think, in terms of Israel?
I don't think, well, in order to put a government in place in Gaza, it has to be Palestinian government. And Netanyahu from day one, I think I heard him in the first week of the war, said Hamastan and Fatahstan. In other words, for him bringing elements of the PLO, not even the Palestinian Authority, just elements of the PLO is like keeping Hamas in Gaza. And therefore, and this is what the international community is telling Israel, this is what the Arab world is telling Israel. If you want to have a ceasefire, you want to have a hostage release swap, if you want to stabilize the region and Gaza, you need to bring an international force based on Palestinians. And Netanyahu, the government of Netanyahu, is not ready for it. We don't know what's the strategy.
Well, their argument is we can't do that until we've destroyed Hamas. So,
but Hamas has been destroyed.
Okay.
As a military force.
Not according to CNN.
Well,
yeah, we can leave that.
Seems a bit of a game of whack-a-mole, right?
You cannot destroy a guerrilla force. Even ISIS and Al Qaeda still are around somewhere, true. But they are weak and ineffective.
They don't control territory. I think that's key.
What?
They don't control any territory. That's key.
They do. In Syria, in Iraq, they did control a territory.
They did, but they don't control as much territory as.
But in Gaza, Hamas doesn't control the territory.
Well, we're arguing the same point. But yes.
Yes.
All right. Yossi Barman, Bianca, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, despite soaring tensions across the Middle East, oil prices have not risen. Instead, they've been dragged down by a global stock market sell-off centred on fears of a US recession. Stocks from around the world plunged today, including the Nikkei, which saw its worst day since the 1987 Black Monday crash on Wall Street. To talk more about that, we're joined by Simon Henderson. He's the Director of Gulf and Energy Policy of the Energy Policy Programme. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Simon. Great to have you with us. So, given how high the tensions in the region are right now, you would expect oil prices to be sky high. That isn't the case this time around, though.
Sky high is a relative term. Last week, the price of Brent crude, which is the most widely traded oil, was in the mid-80s dollars per barrel. And then we woke up this morning, or at least I did, in my time here in Washington, D.C., to discover that the Japanese stock market had fallen by 10 or 11%, and there was expected to be an impact on European stock markets. And then by the time I'd had breakfast and come to my institute, it would be hitting the American stock markets as well. It's too early to say where we are on this one stock market-wise, but the oil price has only fallen what I would regard as a bit, in that Brent crude is now in its just above the mid-70s. And so it's hardly a collapse. Everybody's in a wait-and-see situation. And the waiting and the seeing is how much the world economy reacts to this sentiments in stock markets, and also Middle East-wise, what happens between Israel and Iran, if it's going to happen at all in the next few days or next weeks.
Well, quite, and there is a great deal of uncertainty here in the region. I think that is an understatement. Everybody poised to see what Iran is going to do. If this uncertainty becomes long-term, what does it mean for the Gulf states?
Well, a lower oil price for states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Kuwait, it means it's more difficult to meet budget requirements. Mark you, these are very wealthy countries anyway, and so the idea of cutting back on budgets isn't the same as if you're doing it in Britain. But this will also have an impact on Iran, which has been trying to expand its oil production despite sanctions against it. That expansion has been relatively successful. And so if the oil price is high, the Iranians have got some additional revenues out of it. And so if the oil price falls, this only adds to the discounts they have to offer anyway in order to sell their crude. So it will hit Iran as well. Unfortunately, Iranian political and diplomatic activity doesn't appear to be as closely linked to the price of oil as perhaps many of us would hope.
Now, there's a report here which claims Prime Minister Netanyahu has shelved plans to pursue a normalisation deal with Saudi Arabia for the time being. Do you think that that is also the view in Riyadh, and do you think normalisation will ever happen?
It's a very good question. I've always been personally rather sceptical about not about normalization, because the degree of normalization has been taking place anyway. After all, Israeli passenger aircraft now fly across Saudi Arabia in order to get not only to the UAE, but also to Asia, points east from Israel. And there's considerable cooperation on security and defense aspects. But normalization in these terms means diplomatic recognition. And so it doesn't really surprise me that this is going slow. The MBS, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, clearly wants a degree of normalization with Israel because he thinks it's a natural economic partner for the kingdom. But although he's a one-man ruler, his father being unwell and not really functioning, MBS also has to take some account of what local domestic political opinion is in the kingdom. And it would seem, although this is harder to track, that the average Saudi isn't happy about what's been going on in Gaza and doesn't probably at this point want to develop relations with Israel, or more precisely, doesn't want to reward Israel with the prize of normalization at such a challenging time.
Simon Henderson, you are the Director of the Gulf and Energy Policy Programme at the Washington Institute. I'm sorry we got your title wrong at the beginning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Now, the UAE claims it's uncovered a plot to revive the Muslim Brotherhood. Let's get the latest on that with our Bastien Bourri. He's over in Dubai. Bastien, tell us about this group and what were they trying to do?
Well, officially, the court sentenced all these defendants, all being Emirati citizens, by the way, to life imprisonment for creating, establishing, and managing a committee called the Justice and Dignity Committee, with the purpose of committing terrorist acts in the UAE. Some others received prison terms for cooperating with this group, for advocating for it on social media, and for laundering money even to fund this organization. Now, the verdict can still be appealed, but the accusations are pretty clear. They allegedly incited violence and unrest in the country, mimicking events in other Arab states during the Arab Spring, as you remember, including protests and clashes leading to potential deaths, injuries, property destruction, and threatening national security. Of course, that's the Emirati version. As you can imagine, the Gulf states have a problem with the Muslim brotherhoods. These are actually rare occasions to shed some light on the presence of a political opposition here in the United Arab Emirates, whatever it may be. A pretty small and meager opposition is true, but still, it is made up of several hundred lawyers, teachers, students, and human rights activists who, during the Arab Spring from 2011 until 2013, expressed opinions that were publicly favorable to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, as you know, a group or an ideology that's opposed to the ruling families of the Gulf states. So the Muslim Brotherhood is very much frowned upon in Saudi Arabia, here in the UAE, as well as in Bahrain.
Bastien, thank you very much indeed, Bastien Bourri there. Stay with us on I24 News. Caleb Bendavid is here next. Good night.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
countdown to an Iran-led attack nears 0 hour. The U.S. reaffirms its commitment to helping in the defense of Israel. We'll have the latest. Ariel Bibas marks his 5th birthday in Hamas captivity, and the families of the hostages pressure the government to reach a deal to free him and the 114 other Israelis held in Gaza. As Kamala Harris gets ready to announce her pick for the Democratic candidate for vice president, is the top contender, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, being singled out for criticism because he's Jewish? We'll take a closer look. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. Amid mounting signs that Iran and its proxies are preparing to attack Israel, even as early as tonight, the United States says it will stand by its close ally if the threats are carried out to avenge last week's targeted killings of terror leaders in Tehran and Beirut. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told his G7 counterparts that Washington believes an Iranian attack on Israel could begin within the next 24 to 48 hours. And while Iran says it does not seek a regional escalation, it is insisting that it must punish Israel for the recent assassinations. Middle East correspondent Ariel Ostron has more in this report.
As Israel braces for an expected Iranian attack in response to the assassination of Hamas leader in Tehran, its neighbors and allies, including the United States, are preparing to defend it, as they did last time around.
We've also been very, very consistent about proving, not just with words, but with action, that we're going to stand up and defend Israel. I mean, on April 13th, when Iran launched 300 missiles and drones, the United States had aircraft, fighter planes in the air to knock them down. We've now added additional naval and air assets to the region to help defend Israel again. I think we've proven time and time again that we're going to support Israel.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reportedly told his counterparts from G7 countries on Sunday that a combined attack by Iran and Hezbollah could begin in the next 24 to 48 hours. Israeli sources warn such predictions cannot be made with certainty, as the IDF says the current security guidelines have not changed.
Iran and its proxies seek to surround us with a stranglehold of terror on 7 fronts. Their visible aggression is insatiable, but Israel is not helpless. We are determined to stand against them on every front, in every arena, far and near. Anyone who murders our citizens, anyone who harms our country will be held accountable. They will pay a very heavy price.
Meanwhile, Iran continues to threaten Israel with a harsh response, vowing the assassination of Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh, blamed on Israel, will not go unanswered. The commander of the IRGC, Hossein Salami, vowed the response against Israel will come at the appropriate time and place.
The Zionists think that by assassinating Haniyeh, they have reached some success that helps them survive. They are digging their own grave, and they will gradually get themselves buried in these swamps and holes.
The Islamic Republic of Iran, using its intrinsic right, based on international rules and regulations, will definitely take serious deterrent actions to guarantee its security and punish the aggressor with power, decisiveness, and toughness. But we do not seek regional escalation.
With Washington believing the Iranian attack is imminent, U.S. President Joe Biden will convene his national security team in the Situation Room on Monday to discuss developments in the Middle East. Biden will also speak with Jordan's King Abdullah, his only official scheduled call for Monday. The call comes a day after Jordan's Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi made a rare visit to Iran in attempts to prevent further escalation. In the visit, Safadi reportedly told his Iranian counterpart that Jordan will not allow its airspace to become an arena for war. Ya Allah!
And with us in the studio for more, we have Reserves IDF Major General Eitan Dango, former military secretary to 3 defense ministers, former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories. We have our correspondent, Zach Anders, and our senior correspondent, Bianca Zanini. And Eitan, let me start with the comments by Yoav Gallant, the defense minister today, that Israel is going to be ready to move from defense to a quick offense. Quick offense against who? Hezbollah? Or we're not talking about attacking, for example, Iran, are we?
I think this is a very clear message to Hezbollah and especially to Iran. Because during summer we start to attack you have, of course, all the right and you need to defend. But meanwhile, I think that Israel is already has some plans how to react offensively towards Tehran and towards Beirut in a way that the message will be delivered very quick and very soon. And one of the things that we know when you choose, like Iranian Ayatollahs and the main leader, to attack loudly Israel, they are like the teaching Israel to punish Israel. They take on account the reaction of Israel not 2-3 days later. We are not, of course, in the same scenario as in April, as we are not expecting Iran to use the same system of attacking Israel because Iran at the end failed on April. Iran cannot allow itself to fail. Iran chose to lead this kind of attacking Israel. I think that Iran is taking on itself some, let's say, very, very deep rescue, very deep kind of activities as Israel will react to Iran on a way and in fields that Iran worked on them in the last 40 years. And I mean, it can happen from conventional to unconventional facilities, infrastructure, etc. And the meaning the United States is here, it means that the coordination, cooperation, well-organized, sharing intelligence, the way that United States and Israel are looking towards this kind of the evening can be in a few hours or later on, is a great message to Iran to think again deeply, because the other side, besides being defended, has a lot to offer how to attack.
Okay, well, let's go to our correspondent, Robert Swift, who's in northern Israel, an area that may bear the brunt of the attack, certainly from Hezbollah. Robert, and I mentioned Yoav Galan's comments that was in Northern Command today, trying to reassure the North that Israel will be ready and be ready to defend itself, even taking the fight to Hezbollah on its territory if it has to.
Right, indeed. On a day when it seems like there's been at least half a dozen different attacks by Hezbollah throughout Israel's northern territories, in the west, some in the central region, and here in the east, in the Kiryat Shmona area, where there have been numerous drone infiltrations and successful interceptions by Israel's Iron Dome system. Israel, for its part, has responded, conducting at least 2 airstrikes in the last, throughout the course of the day, targeting a Hezbollah drone team and killing 2 individuals in the first strike and 1 in the second strike. But the residents of the north seem pretty unfazed by all this. We've been spending the day moving around Kiryat Shmona, seeing some of the damage that's been caused here over the course of the months. And when asking people, when asking residents who remain here how they expect this next phase, this escalation with Iran, Hezbollah, to go, they seem to think it's just going to be more of the same, and they're ready for it.
You know, more of the same, Robert, but we've had analysts in the studio say, who's to say Hezbollah may not try a ground attack, a quick jump over the border at one of the communities there, even though most are evacuated, but there are IDF troops there. They may not just go by the playbook they went last time, as our guest here has just said.
Well, indeed, you're not wrong. The residents here might be kind of unfazed by all this, but in a document that the IDF showed to the mayors of the northern communities yesterday, they laid out some pretty stark findings, including a much wider evacuation than what has taken place here. They said if a larger escalation is likely to take place, which could see the IDF entering Lebanon, or, like you say, Hezbollah attempting to enter here, if a larger scale conflict's likely to happen, the predictions that the IDF itself made is communications, water, energy blackouts for up to 3 days, and a much larger evacuation of the population of the north than we've seen to this date.
All right, Robert Swift, and please stay close to shelter, just in case tonight should be a night we see an escalation there. in the north and elsewhere as well. And Zach, Eitan mentioned it, the U.S. cooperation seems to be a key factor in Israel's plans, especially when it comes to defense. Michael Kurilla, General, the head of the Central Command, or CENTCOM, which covers the Middle East, that was effective last time, and really maybe the most closest that the U.S. and Israel have really cooperated militarily in their long alliance, in the last attack in April and this one perhaps coming up.
And I've been going through my notes. I've heard from U.S. correspondents say that there are more ships, more U.S. assets in the region than there were in April during that first attack. Still need to go back and double check that, but it does appear that this is a sizable presence. We've got at least 6 ships, apart from a carrier strike group and an amphibious strike group in the Mediterranean. That's a lot of U.S. assets. We've heard from some of the U.S. correspondents as well that they've been pulling some of the ammunition resources away from Indo-PACOM, which is U.S. forces that are in the Indo-Pacific. They're shuttling in with these heavy carrier aircraft some additional essentially missiles and interceptors and bits that you would need to resupply if there was to be a large-scale attack. This is the time that Iran has broadcasted that they're going to perpetrate an attack, has given the U.S. and its allies a lot of time to mobilize, to put ships in the region, to put aircraft in the region, and to work behind the scenes with diplomatic channels to try and affirm or tie up with partners in the region that could potentially contribute to shooting down targets that enter their airspace, like Jordan. So it would be interesting to see what the cooperation looks like in a large-scale attack, knowing that there were partners in April that helped out.
Right, and Bianca, Israel, the U.S. trying to build their coalition, their partners, but Iran also trying to find support beyond just the, of course, proxies that it has here in the region.
Yeah, Iran has reportedly called an emergency meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation for this Wednesday to discuss the killing and to discuss its response. Now, that may very well be true, but it doesn't mean that we can count on then nothing happening until Wednesday. Right. I mean, it could be a smokescreen, it could be an actual meeting, it could be a meeting to discuss what they already did. Right. They could also decide to respond in several stages. And this is the big issue here. It's that we don't know how Iran is going to respond. And I think Iran has also had some trouble figuring out, because the way that they decide to respond could really change the whole reality of the Middle East. And of course, Iran has its proxies, but it's not like it has a lot of countries that are allies that are willing to support them in a war, more than just support it in theory. Right, we've got even Russia and China that support Iran in many ways, but would they really enter a war with Israel? That said, Israel does have its allies that are saying that they are more willing to support Israel actively, and we know this. What we just heard.
Right, and what we saw in April, the U.S. actively.
I think also that Iran is like a gambling here, because Iran is the second time they're taking the leadership on a physical activities in this war. They are not on the back, they are not the architect, they are on the front, they are leading the attack. Right. And by such a case, it's emphasized the fact of the problem that all the Arab modern countries around them are looking on Iran. And this is a risk that Iran is taking. On the other hand, the timing that we are here, as an Israelis, we have to take very seriously all the way or all the opportunities to be on readiness, because Iran failed at the first circle on April by choosing some kind of activities. Iran now, it cannot allow itself not to create damage or to say we succeed in the results. Right. Without results, Iran will fail again, and for Iran, it's withdrawal.
Right, and we keep in mind that, as you said, Bianca, it could come in stages. The first stage could be a sudden attack by Hezbollah, which would take a matter of minutes for its rockets even to reach us here in Tel Aviv.
I see also the opportunity that on the north, in Lebanon, can be used ground core as well by Hezbollah and others.
As we mentioned. I do want to move on, because while Israel is bracing for a major attack by Iran and its proxies, anxiety is also mounting naturally in Lebanon, where more and more countries are calling on their citizens to leave amid fears of a serious escalation between Israel and Hezbollah. Yulia Pobogalova takes a closer look at the situation north of Israel.
As Israel prepares for an imminent attack by Iran and Hezbollah after high-profile assassinations in Tehran and Beirut, panic is also gripping the streets of Lebanon.
I'm very scared. I will pick myself up and go. I've already booked a ticket, and now they're saying the airport is going to boom. So I'm scared, honestly. I'm very scared. I'm scared I won't be able to leave this country and die here.
More and more countries are issuing warnings to its citizens to leave or not travel to Lebanon amid fears of a wide-scale war. A growing list of governments are calling on their citizens in the country to book any available flight out of Lebanon and, quote, leave now.
Do not travel to Lebanon at the moment. There is a risk that the Beirut airport might not be open for commercial flights. And given the numbers of people who are there, there's no guarantee that we can just guarantee that people will be able to come home through other means if that airport is shut.
This widespread call for evacuation adds to the suspension of flights by airlines like Emirates, Air France, and Lufthansa due to safety concerns. At Beirut Airport, people are waiting in long lines as the tension escalates the anxiety.
We live in Paris and we came to Lebanon hoping to spend 3 weeks with our family here. But because of the situation, we had to leave earlier.
Meanwhile, Lebanon has received emergency medical supplies from the WHO to equip its hospitals for possible war injuries.
Our responsibility is to ensure that we have, emergency supplies and trauma kits, all the referral hospitals in the country. And we are working very closely with the Minister of Health as well as other partners to facilitate and to ensure that these supplies are ready for any eventuality.
But Lebanese civilians are not the only ones in the country in a state of panic. Hezbollah is also evacuating senior personnel and military equipment from strongholds in Beirut, anticipating possible Israeli strikes. Iran has further inflamed the situation, suggesting that Hezbollah might escalate its attacks against Israeli civilians. And while Iran continues its psychological games, the whole region remains on the edge.
Eitan, does a rocket reaching Tel Aviv or even being intercepted at Tel Aviv or striking Haifa give Israel enough, I say, diplomatic cover to strike Beirut, to strike the port of Beirut, maybe even the airport there, or the electric plants of Beirut?
I think that the first moment when we will identify any kind of threats and launching of rocket or missiles or other kind of activity, it gives legitimation to Israel in this scenario to use and to open its plans to over Beirut, over Tehran, over Damascus, and over Iraq, and even for the Houthis, because it's a regional attack leading by Iran. And I think the fact that Israel is holding very close to itself, its plans are giving the main, idea that the response of Israel should be, in my opinion, also with a surprise and unexpected on the way. What will be targeting, how will be, and how much ammunition will be used. You think that Hezbollah is by themselves moving ahead all its population from Beirut, from the Dahia? They understand exactly what will be the future in Lebanon in the coming days. The situation in Lebanon and what is, look at the atmosphere, I think that by calculating what can be lost, as I mentioned before about Iran, also in Lebanon. Israel, of course, cannot cover itself 100% without being damaged. We will be damaged. It will be some scenarios probably that will be hard to us, and we will need to use our systems and to defense and rescue, etc. But at the end, we have the most important air arm all over the Middle East. We are very strong on defending now the border with Lebanon, and I think that the reaction of Israel should be quick, strong, and with a lot of surprise.
Yes.
Yes, I just want to add, Iran really holds an important card right now. Last time, Israel's response to the Iranian attack was very tempered. It was mild. One would say it was a drone that basically showed what Israel could be capable of doing, that flew in very deep into the country, flew right by a nuclear site, showing the Iranians that Israel could do more if it needs to. But the last time, the response was quite mild. It was more of a message than it was anything else. And it gave the Iranians the possibility to take a step back, and the situation calmed down a little bit. Now, of course, the situation is different. But again, we have Iran in a position where they are promising a very strong response. And depending on how strong they decide to go and how much damage that response might actually cause, what we've seen in the past is that Israel is able to find a good response, a balancing response that doesn't escalate it too far. The question is if Iran's going to be able to do the same.
Right. Reports of the Ayatollah Khamenei saying we don't care if it's a regional war, but that could just be bluster. And there are those who even suggest that Israel should do a preemptive attack in the way it did in 1967, but then it would have to get probably closer to a knowledge of when that actual attack would come.
I think we need to also realize that this could be a very slippery slope, that as soon as there's launches detected from Iran, we could see a coalition of U.S. and Israeli forces striking targets in Iran or the points of origin where these launches are coming from within minutes.
Sure.
Iran's going to be tested in a really fascinating way. If this is going to be a combined attack and they're going to use Hezbollah and they need to time these attacks together, that is a massive logistical challenge for any modern army, let alone for Iran and a proxy terror organization to coordinate their attacks. And as the attacks keep going, if this lasts for days, they're going to have to be in constant contact and communication. High-level decision-making is going to need to be coordinated on both ends. That's something they've never been tested with, and we don't know what their capabilities of when it comes to cyber warfare at this level, or being able to communicate and keep constant communications at the same level that the U.S.
Right, without Israel and the U.S. of course managing to get to hear those conversations and then to use them. All right, I do want to move on, and I want to move a bit away now and back to the Gaza Strip, because there is still a battle going on there every day, and at least we forget. And now, one key area of Gaza is the Philadelphia corridor. That's the narrow strip of land at the southern edge of the Gaza Strip that borders Egypt. It's become a point of particular contention in recent weeks, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly insisting that in any hostage for ceasefire deal with Hamas, the IDF needs to remain in full control of the Philadelphia corridor. Other security experts, though, say arrangements with Egypt could be made that don't require a permanent IDF presence there. Well, the discovery of massive smuggling tunnels under the Philadelphia corridor is only going to add fuel to this debate, and our Zach Anders has more on that in this report.
A tunnel tall enough to fit a truck, wide enough for a military Humvee. That's what the IDF says has been running underneath the Philadelphia corridor, revealing these images over the weekend. The pictures then used to geolocate its approximate location here, less than 2 miles away from the Rafah crossing. The nearly 10-foot or 3-meter-high tunnel that runs straight from Gaza into Egypt was discovered in the past week by combat engineers in the IDF.
We are focusing on locating and neutralizing underground infrastructure in the Rafah area and the Philadelphia corridor. So far, dozens of tunnels have been located, which are being investigated, neutralized, and destroyed by our troops. Not all of these are active tunnels. Some are very old and have been previously dealt with by IDF troops. We are neutralizing them all. Last week, our troops located a large-scale terror tunnel in the Philadelphia corridor, approximately 3 meters high, large enough for a vehicle to pass through. At this stage, the troops are investigating the tunnel route and neutralizing it. The IDF is thoroughly destroying the underground infrastructure along the Philadelphia corridor and will act with determination to prevent their formation in the future. This is a continuous and complex effort, combining operational, engineering, and advanced technological capabilities.
The IDF says this is one of several dozen tunnels discovered near the Philadelphia corridor in the last few months, claiming that 25 of the discovered passageways run under and into Egyptian territory.
Eitan, I believe you were one of those security experts who say the IDF may not necessarily have to stay in the Philadelphia corridor. Does that change your mind at all?
Maybe I will surprise you and make some priority here. I think that the main important thing in this timing is to have the release of the hostages, even in giving up some kind of not staying in Philadelphia and creating a mechanism with Egypt that will cover. If it's not working, I think we are strong enough to return them. We are not going to leave Gaza. We are not going to make a farewell to Gaza Strip all over. We will be in some areas. We can have our kind of looking and observation concerning what happened. Tomorrow you will not find in 2 weeks the tunnels there. It will take time. Much more important to me as a military, as an Israeli, is to see back the people. And besides, what we're dealing at the first half an hour about the scenario in the north, I think under ceasefire, all the situation in this region can be changed.
Okay, we'll talk about the hostages a little more in a minute, but yeah, Bianca, CNN reporting that even with these achievements of the IDF and its activities, Hamas is reconstituting itself in Gaza.
Yeah, that's right, and one of the reasons, of course, has been exactly these tunnels that we just heard about, and specifically in the Philadelphia corridor, the ability to smuggle in weapons and keep restocking and keep replenishing their supply. CNN made an analysis together with 2 American think tanks, and they say that nearly half of Hamas's military battalions in the north and central part of Gaza have partially rebuilt their capabilities. They said that of the 24 battalions of Hamas in Gaza, only 3 have been entirely destroyed. 8 of them are still operating, weakened, but still operating, and 13 are now fighting guerrilla style. So there's no doubt, I want to make this clear, that Israel has weakened Hamas significantly, and that the war has changed its character from a war against an army, an actual army, and then to guerrilla fighting style. But what is surprising is that the Hamas battalions and the fighters keep coming up. It's a game of whack-a-mole right now. They keep popping up.
All right. Well, clearly a lot more work to do in Gaza. Please stay with us, and please stay with us. We'll be right back on The Rundown.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Now, the birthday of a 5-year-old child would normally be a reason to celebrate, but not one that is being spent held hostage by Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip. Ariel Bibas was kidnapped along with his then 9-month-old little brother, Kfir, along with their parents, Yorden and Shiri, from Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th. The red-headed brothers, the youngest of all the remaining 115 hostages still held in Gaza, have become especially poignant reminders of the inhumanity of their situation. And Ariel's birthday is being marked here in Tel Aviv and elsewhere by some special events. And let's go to our correspondent, Emily Francis, out in Tel Aviv tonight, taking part, or being there at one of those events. Tell us what's happening in Tel Aviv and elsewhere, especially to mark the 5-year-old, the 5th birthday of Ariel Bibas.
Hi, good evening, Caleb and everyone. Yes, listen, the Bibas family are unfortunately the most well-known really around the world, given these 2 beautiful boys, red-headed, beautiful boys, should never have been not only taken hostage, but still in captivity. The fact they're still in captivity, as well as both their mother and father, is just heartbreaking, not only to the Bibas family, but also to this entire nation and to the world. Earlier today, on Sunday, there was an event actually in Central Park. So there are people marking this very somber day. But here, of course, in Tel Aviv, it was especially filled with so many people, with an event that started in Habima Square. And then they marched here to Hostage Square, where they had, again, I don't know a better word than celebration. I guess a commemoration is a better way of explaining, given that it's hard to celebrate on this day. But of course, you still want to honor the fact that this beautiful young boy is turning 5 in captivity, and very likely not even knowing it's his own birthday. Very likely his mother and father aren't even aware, as these hostages really have no idea of time and a sense of time. So again, very emotional, not a dry eye in the house. At the end of this ceremony, like with what we saw at the 1-year birthday of Kfir Bibas back in February, they let out about over 100 balloons, orange balloons, of course, a very, very emotional call to the world. And this is just one of those unfortunate events that here we are over 300 days into this, and another birthday celebrated of a child who would be going to kindergarten right now. Here's more from an interview with Elon Keshed, who is the cousin of Yorden Bibas, and here's what he had to say about what they're going through.
We really didn't imagine that we'll come to this day. I mean, Kfir's birthday was very close to the 100th day, and now Ariel's birthday is close to the 300th day, and I mean, is this the world we want to live in? I just can't believe that someone would let children be held as hostages as part of some political bullshit that's not part of it's not fault of their own. So how could it happen? Our worst nightmares didn't prepare us for this scenario. And I have to say, I am really disappointed with the government. I'm disappointed from the Western world. I mean, terrorist organization takes children as hostages, and people are pretty quiet about it.
Really heartbreaking. I had a conversation with Tomer Keshed, another cousin of the Bibas family, just totally heartbreaking. Emily, I do want to mention, you mentioned there was an event in Central Park. Of course, we're talking about Central Park in New York City, for those who don't know. Yeah. We should mention that.
On Sunday.
On a Sunday, and it was a nice turnout among the community there. And Tomer Keshed had mentioned all over the world, there have been smaller events for people in Australia and elsewhere for, of course, Ariel Bibas and Kfir and their parents. So maybe they come home as quickly and safely as possible. Yeah. Emily Francis out in Tel Aviv this evening. Thank you. And Becca, we should note there are still talks going on. Of course, no one expects in the current situation there's going to be any resolution, but certainly Israel and the so-called mediating parties are still involved in trying to make some kind of deal.
Yes and no, Kalev. The Israeli media are saying that negotiations are officially on hold right now and will not pick up until Iran has launched its response to Israel, so everything is on hold on that part. And also Hamas announced yesterday that from their part, negotiations right now are frozen until they find a successor to Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas, was killed, of course. And but even before that, we heard yesterday Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went out and said that he is working hard to get a deal, to get the hostages home, that Israel wants a deal. At the same time, just in the last few days, we heard that he was talking to Israeli officials saying that he wanted to wait until he got a confirmation by the U.S. that if there was no progress between phase 1 and 2, that Israel would be able to resume its fighting against Hamas. Now, U.S. officials have said that has already been confirmed, that they've already agreed to give this letter to the U.S., that Netanyahu needs to stop finding excuses to not go through with this deal. And this is, of course, one of the things that he's been criticized for a lot, that he is stringing the deal along or pushing it, keeping with more and more excuses to not have to go through with the deal. I do have to say that I do think that Netanyahu would be happy to see the hostages back home, but the deal doesn't seem to be a priority for him. At least it's inconsistent with what he's saying and what we're actually seeing.
Well, there are different interpretations, and I want to be fair to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is also says, and his supporters say, he's weighing the fate of the hostages against the fate of the soldiers who are fighting every day in the Gaza Strip.
And the fate of the security of the country.
I
understand that, but I was saying specifically whether or not he was interested in a deal right now. This is something that he really wants.
One of the goals that were put to the soldiers and the commanders inside Gaza all over the 10th months of fighting, first of all, is, of course, to break Hamas, but secondly is to release of the hostages. And many of them, almost all of them, are looking to bring back those who can be alive home. And I think that Israel missed 3 opportunities till now, based on the military power, to bring such agreement. Of course, not as the present situation. We are now in Rafah. We achieve in Rafah in breaking the tunnels. We stop the movement from South Gaza to the north. We are holding the north area. Now we are coming to a real moment, and I think we are ready. Unfortunately, if there is now escalation with Iran, of course, as we are waiting for, I think that we moved this opportunity to the back, unfortunately. I'm very sad for it, because I think that we are in circumstances based on the military power that we can allow ourselves to come to agreement, to release, and to be on Gaza under circumstances, because, look, Hamas is looking for their way. There is empty places of senior commanders of terrorism. What they are looking, Sinwar is alone there inside Gaza. Of course, they have capacities and they are launching rocket, and I told you it's a guerrilla fighting. But we are on a stage. If the government put this goal and the man on the top of its goals, it should be give in this time a clear mind to this opportunity to release them.
All right. Well, certainly when you think of the Bibas family, and especially those 2 beautiful boys, that should be, of course, a priority, if not the priority, at the moment. And I want to turn away for a moment from Israel to U.S. politics, but believe me, it's very connected to what is happening here in Israel and the region. Now, in less than 48 hours, U.S. Vice President and presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris is expected to announce her running mate. Among the top names for the Democratic candidate for vice president is the Pennsylvania governor, Josh Shapiro. Now, like the other contenders for that VP slot, he is a centrist, pro-Israel politician, and he's also Jewish. And criticism against Shapiro is coming in hard, this time for a left, with a movement against him called No Genocide Josh. Well, senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has more in this report.
The countdown has begun. Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris is set to announce her running mate within the next 48 hours.
We support something called real freedom. Exactly what Kamala Harris has been fighting for her whole career.
Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro is one of the top names, together with Arizona Senator Mark Kelly and Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. All of them largely unknown to Americans, and all of them supportive of Israel in the war against Hamas. Perhaps the biggest foreign policy issue at the moment and the most divisive. But one of the candidates is receiving major backlash for his pro-Israel stance, Josh Shapiro, who is also Jewish. Shapiro was quick to condemn Hamas's horrific attack on Israel on October 7th and has been very vocal in his criticism of the pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protests that have taken over many college campuses across the U.S. in recent months.
Palestine will be free!
As a young man, he participated in a youth program in Israel which included volunteering on a kibbutz, a farm, and on service projects on an Israeli army base. His critics insist that his Jewishness is not an issue and that he goes further in his pro-Israel stance than the other candidates. Shapiro distanced himself from an op-ed he wrote in 1993 when he was in college, where he said Palestinians are too battle-minded to pursue peace with Israel. Today, he says he supports a two-state solution. Supporters point out that Shapiro is not more pro-Israel than any of the other candidates and say that the fact that there's a whole movement against him, but not any of the others, is a clear example of anti-Semitism. Voices agitating against Shapiro are the Democratic Socialists of America,
currently protesting the atrocities in Gaza.
And the webpage called No Genocide Josh actively tries to get Shapiro off the list. For now, Shapiro is showing his support of Harris.
She will now have to make an important decision, as then candidate Biden had to make, and that is who to run with, who should be her running mate. That's a deeply personal decision, and a decision that should be made really free from any political pressure.
Kamala Harris is expected to announce her decision by August 7th.
I'ma keep running 'cause the winner don't quit on themselves.
I just want to point out that there have been alerts coming now in the north of Israel, sirens going off there. Maybe we'll go back, if we can, to our correspondent later in the program to check up on him there. But now let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, in New York. And Mike, let's remind our viewers, there's already been a Jewish vice presidential candidate on a Democratic ticket, the late Senator Joe Lieberman, who just passed away earlier this year, and that was like 25 years ago. But the irony is, I don't remember the kind of pushback that he got that Josh Shapiro is getting now. And that speaks something to the political and maybe even social climate right now in the United States.
No doubt whatsoever. Times have changed, and you got to look in the moment here, not only in the thick of a deadly war here between Israel and Hamas, but also the progression of the Democratic Party to the left, further and further, it seems, to the left in terms of its positions on Israel, in terms of its positions on what qualifies or doesn't qualify as anti-Semitism, as if they're the ones that can assess that. So Shapiro, not, again, as the report just said, his views aren't all that different from mainstream Democratic Party thinking, and not all that different from the other vice presidential candidates that have made their positions known. It may, skew a little bit here and there on a given issue related to Israel, but very much within mainstream thinking. So one would have to look for other reasons why Shapiro is being singled out here at the moment. By the way, Reuters reporting within the last hour that there are two vice presidential candidates still in the running now for Kamala Harris's ticket. That would be Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Shapiro. Walz known to be a bit more folksy, a bit more labor-friendly. Shapiro, though, carries with him that valuable state of Pennsylvania, one that many analysts say can't be won or probably won't be won without him on the ticket.
Right. I'll say that Tim Walz, though he's still very much a centrist Democrat, is being someone who's got more support from the so-called progressive wing of the party, though he does not belong to it. Mike, I want to just, we've been talking earlier, we're talking here primarily, of course, in the studio about the what we believe to be the pending attack by Iran and its proxies on Israel and the cooperation with the United States, the U.S. taking an active part in it. And I presume that is also going to start going to be part of the discussion there in the U.S. Politically as well, as we see, especially if we should see the situation escalate here into a regional conflict in which the U.S. could be playing an active part in.
We'll see to what extent, obviously. We're about now 30 minutes away from a meeting in the Situation Room in which President Biden, Vice President Harris, and other national security officials and diplomats and various personnel will be gathering here to assess the situation in the Middle East and kind of plot a path forward here and keep an eye on things. No doubt this will spill over into the political domain. Anything having to do with Israel in the Middle East typically does. And I don't expect much different from what we've seen so far. Republicans, 99% of them within the halls of Congress have given their support to Israel, saying America needs to do what it has to do and go above and beyond to make sure Israel is protected here against any Iranian attack. We've seen various pieces of legislation, by the way, coming from both sides of the aisle within the last 4 or 5 days to that extent. And within the Democratic Party, the centrists tend to think with the Republicans in that respect. Meanwhile, the more progressive wing saying that America should not be involved to the extent that it is already, let alone going any further in trying to protect Israel here. I would guess going forward here, we'll see a similar tact, regardless of what came out in reports recently about President Biden telling Prime Minister Netanyahu not to escalate any further than what's already happened, or he'll be without U.S. support. If that report is even so, likely a bluff to a certain extent. We've heard that any number of times before. I can't imagine the president, especially with his vice president, in the middle of an election campaign, that suddenly they're going to leave Israel to fend for itself here in a major war against Iran.
All right, Mike Wagenheim, a lot of things are coming together at the same time. We'll have to see how they play off each other, and it will be interesting to see at that announcement. I can't remember when a choice of a vice president has garnered so much interest and maybe also as debate there. Mike Wagenheim in New York, thank you for that. All right, I do have an update. There are several rocket alerts in the north. Communities like Rosh Nikra and Netua right on the border, but Eitan Dangot, I notice there is also an alert of a possible aerial vehicle penetration, possibly a drone or something, and that's also in the Stay Maron area, which is actually coming off a little south off the border, and there is, of course, military installations
but I
there.
think it's still on the level that we were used all over the last weeks, and it's not crossing, let's say, something that shows on immediate escalation.
No, I'm not
and
making
I think
anything.
it's more or less over a local event.
Right, it's still within the parameters of the attacks.
Don't forget also that Israel attacked a few hours ago inside the south of Lebanon and succeed to strike one or two terrorists from Hezbollah in this area as well. So it can be like kind of reaction.
Okay, but I'm seeing alerts now throughout, both from East and West Galilee. So you have Rosh Nikra by the coast, and then places now like Gush Halav, block with Jish, Khorfesh.
This is the central west side.
Right, for the central west side, but still yes. Maron is going a little more to the east.
But we are not surprising those places.
No, okay, but we have the alert, and of course people in those areas have to observe home front command regulations. All right. Let's get back to Iran now, but not necessarily its expected attack on Israel, because while the world is focusing on the Tehran regime's external aggression, it has been carrying out a harsh crackdown internally on all individuals that it considers enemies of the Islamic Republic. Jody Notelowitz looks closer at the Iran war that we often overlook, which is the Ayatollah's war against its own people.
In the wake of the latest crackdowns in Iran, security forces have made multiple arrests, part of a broader pattern of escalating repression in the Islamic Republic since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, in particular targeting women and artists.
Inside Iran, we see increased repression. There has been warnings by the government following the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Iran. There have been warnings by the government about people who are tweeting about it. That, if you tweet the wrong thing, you could get arrested. And as we get closer to war conditions, this will also increase. But there have been also two unrelated incidents that really show the repressive nature of the regime and how it continues to act in this way.
Recent arrests include Zara Esmaili, a Tehran-based street performer whose videos, sans hijab, had been widely circulated on social media. Since her arrest, the singer's condition, whereabouts, and charges have not been made available to her family. Similarly, dissident rapper Tumaj Salehi was arrested for his involvement in protests against the regime. And Grammy Award-winning singer Shervin Hajipu began his imprisonment for his viral song, which became the anthem of the women, life, freedom protests. Most recently, Kobra Ghalami, an Afghan social researcher, was deported for allegedly failing to comply with the Iran's mandatory hijab regulations. Ghalami was known for her critiques of the treatment of Afghan migrant women in Iran. Speaking to Iran International, founder of the Berlin-based Sing campaign, Faravaz Farvardin noted that, quote,
Iranian authorities often fabricate charges to justify their crackdown on female singers.
And Iranian women, brave enough to fight for themselves.
Farvardin added that, quote,
there is no legal basis for banning female singers,
demonstrating the wider tactics used by the Islamic Republic to stifle criticism and impose gender segregation. In a debate leading up to the elections, new president Masoud Pezeshkian was quoted as saying,
"We will not be able to force women to wear the hijab."
However, since his inauguration, morality police still patrol the streets around Tehran.
All right, let's go back to our correspondent Robert Swift in northern Israel. And Robert, fill us in. We're seeing reports of air raid siren alerts in several areas there in the north.
That's right. So this is sirens going off in the last few minutes. This is taking place in the central to the central eastern area of Israel's northern border. Now, this is on the application giving warnings. This is a mixture of rocket and drone sirens. Usually that indicates that a drone infiltration has occurred and that the IDF is also sounding the rocket sirens due to shrapnel that can occur as a result of the interceptor missiles launched at the drones by the IDF. Now, this is taking place in an area where some of the villages have not been evacuated. So, as we understand from the initial reports, this is possibly in areas where there are still Israeli civilians. And we should say that while this morning there was a string, multiple attacks using drones again in about half a dozen different instances, throughout the afternoon it has been quiet. So this is the first attack across the border in 6, 7, 8 hours.
All right. Again, we stressed here in studio, this is not out of the ordinary. This falls within the parameters of the previous of Hezbollah attacks until now. So we shouldn't take it as more than that. I'm glad to see. I think it's a shelter right behind you, Robert. So I'm glad to see you're staying near a shelter nonetheless. And please do so while you're reporting there. Take care. I just do want to cover some breaking news, just some interesting news items while we're talking. One about Jordan, Eitan.
John, yes, some called it dramatic. I think that we have to pay our attention to it. The Jordan announced that they will not Israel cross or use their sky, not for flying and not even for using it in order to maybe to destroy missiles that were launched to Israel. And
so Jordan publicly saying Israel, it previously said Iran can't use its airspace, now saying the other way, Israel can't violate its airspace.
I think the main interesting thing here, that Jordan is under the focusing of Iran for many reasons. Jordan is the empty now area which Iran would like to use it around Israel. Secondly, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Jordan was called to Iran to find out with him what will be the Jordan, I think, policy, or even to make some pressure on Jordan by Iran, because in Jordan you have, in my opinion, 18 American bases. It's the goalkeeper of our area. It has a lot of importance to Israel. Each thing that is declared by Jordan, we have to be very sensitive, and we have to be one of the supporters of the king in order to continue to put this region in such a balanced way.
Right, not to destabilize his rule. Yeah.
This is coming after the Jordanian foreign minister meets with the Iranian foreign minister for, I believe, the first time in 10 years. So potentially this is just them saying, okay, nobody flies over our airspace, and we're going to shoot down anything Iran sends our direction.
Trying to maintain a neutral stance. A couple of other items. The IDF now, we mentioned the report.
Well, we mentioned a CNN report, that most of the Hamas battalions are still operational. The IDF is now saying that that is incorrect. Most of them has been dismantled. And then they add, this is the IDF, it is estimated that most of the battalions are at a low level of competency and can no longer function as a military framework. Now, again, this is a little bit depending on how you choose to interpret what the CNN report was saying. It said that 3 had been entirely dismantled and a few more were still operational. So perhaps not that much.
I just want to note one thing. The United Nations saying 9 UNRWA employees of the UN agency UNRWA have been suspended, I believe, for suspicion they could have been involved in the October 7th attacks. UNRWA, of course, has been the United Nations agency working in Gaza has been the subject of much criticism here in Israel. We'll follow up on that news. I want to thank all our guests for joining us and all our viewers here on the Rundown on I-24 News.